5 Brewing Wars. Earth Stargate Command, Briefing Room 24, September 2017/Day 30, 0945. Hank Landry was not a happy camper. This morning, he had found a considerable mountain of paperwork on his desk. He had been getting through it at a healthy pace. Had being the operative word, because Daniel Jackson had just come in and asked him to come the briefing room. Besides Jackson, the rest of SG-1 was sitting at the briefing room table. Samantha Carter wasn't present. Hammond was on a mission to salvage the Sun Tzu from the intergalactic void. Also, there were Dr. Carolyn Lamb and Richard Woolsey. But the surprise was the presence of Jeannie Miller. She was sitting at the far end of the table. As Landry sat down, President Mackenzie and General O'Neill came up the stairs from the control room. Landry was about to stand up, but Mackenzie gestured for him to remain seated. He and O'Neill sat down at the table. "Sorry about the unannounced visit," Mackenzie said, "but Mrs. Miller asked me to come." "I know this is a big deal, but there's been a development, Mr. President, and, well, I thought you would want to hear this." Miller looked at Jackson. "Daniel. We just received a report from the new Assurans. There's good news and bad. The good news is that Spira is on schedule. Also, the Ursine colonists are hard at work building their new home. It is actually ahead of schedule. That is where the good news ends." Jackson paused. "We have a major problem with Operation Supernova." "Operation Supernova?" Vala Maldoran asked. "Our plan to blow up the Berserker drones." Vala nodded. She had read the file on the plan, but she had forgotten the name. The plan had been to see the Nakai drone colonies, which had upgraded into ships ahead. Once they reached Galaxy Destiny 2, they would draw the attention of the Berserker drones and their command ships. Then they would self-destruct, taking the drones with them. If Operation Supernova worked as planned, it would thin out the Berserkers before Spira reached their turf. But now the operation was apparently in trouble. "Daniel," General O'Neill said, his tone making it clear he was annoyed. "Am I going to have to shoot somebody?" "The new Asuran Deep Space Internet facility has detected the Berserker control ships. They are no longer in Galaxy Destiny 2. And we're trusting the replicators. The DSI facility at Atlantis has confirmed it," Woolsey began, "and it gets worse. As far as we can tell, every single command ship in existence is headed for the Nakai home galaxy. And somebody has modified their hyperdrives, and based on the telemetry, they did so using knowledge of Destiny's FTL drive." Miller added. "Could they have made the modifications by studying the FTL drive on the siege ships?" Mackenzie asked. "No," Miller said. "The siege ships have a Mark I FTL drive. Even if they copied the drive exactly, it wouldn't be enough. Whoever modified the ships increased their top speed by a 1,600%. A Mark I wouldn't get anywhere near that. So not only is our plan kaput, somebody has destiny?" Mitchell asked. "I'm afraid so," Woolsey said. The new Assurans sensed that there was something wrong, so they ran a deep diagnostic on the feed from Destiny. They found a program inside the feed. Once they eliminated the program, they discovered that Destiny is stationary. The data that Destiny has been sending back is fake. The only way to fake the telemetry is to install a generator program, and the only way to do that is to actually be on the ship," Jackson said. "So, yeah." "What do we do?" Landry asked. "We don't know," Miller said, "but we need a new plan." Landry leaned back. This was indeed bad news. Tilda very bad indeed. Tilda and nobody had discussed the elephant in the room, the Lucian Alliance. So far, the Alliance had not shown any signs of knowing about Spira and her mission. But the war between Earth and the Alliance was still ongoing. So whatever they did, they would have to be careful as they moved forward. Of course, they needed a plan first. Earth Stargate Command, General Landry's office, 24 September 2017/Day 30, 0955. Mackenzie had ended the meeting after Miller's announcement. The president had asked for them to take a break. Landry got the impression that the man wanted a little time to process the information, and the general couldn't blame him. Now, Landry was sitting in his office and reading Jackson and Miller's official report. There was a knock at the door, and he looked up. General O'Neill walked into the room. "Jack." "Hank." O'Neill sat down across from Landry. "So, what do you think?" "I think we have a major problem, but at least they won't catch us by surprise, which, based on this," he closed the folder, "was the plan. There's that. Which doesn't change the fact that we are royally screwed." "Yeah, pretty much." O'Neill leaned back. "Got any ideas?" "One or two." The two of them continued their conversation, planning their next moves and considering their options. As they did so, Jeannie Miller sat in the briefing room and watched them. She had been pondering what their discovery meant and what to do about it. She leaned back and decided that sitting here and staring at the wall wouldn't help anybody. So she got up and walked out of the room. "Tilda, I need some Jell-O." Tilda, she headed for the mess hall. After getting some gelatin and a sandwich, she looked for a place to sit. Much to her surprise, Mackenzie was sitting at one of the tables. He was eating a sandwich and browsing through the official report. She approached the table. "Miss Miller, will you join me?" "Thank you, sir." She sat down across from Mackenzie. "So, any questions?" "Your report only says that somebody modified the command ships," Mackenzie began. "Off the record, would you care a guess as to who or whom that could be?" "Well, whoever has destiny, they know about the Nakai and their interest in the ship. And they consider them enough of a threat to attack them by proxy. But apparently attacking them directly is not an option. Still, they would need some spaceships or space stations to make the modifications, and they have advanced computers. They would need them for the telemetry fraud and to reprogram the command ships." Mackenzie browsed through the folder and took out a drawing. It was a schematic of one of the command ships. The communications relays had scanned the ship and done the math on how far the command ships could fly before they ran out of fuel. The ships would have ended up stranded between two galaxies, several 100,000 light-years away from the Nakai home galaxy. But the scan showed that somebody had added an extra fuel tank to the ships. Not only was the tank made from different metal than the command ships and the drones, the tanks were the exact size needed to get the Nakai home galaxy. And they would need some way to keep the drones from blowing them to pieces as they approached. "Right, because the drones are programmed to attack anything that isn't them or their command ships," Miller said. "They would need a way around that and a detailed knowledge of the software that runs these things. So we're talking about an intelligent race which has advanced technology." He paused. "How long do we have until the command ships reach their destination?" "We're using the satellites to track their progress. If they keep moving at their current speed, they'll be there in 30 days. Mackenzie nodded. This meant that they had some time, and there was one piece of good news, because the communications relays were built by Spira, which meant that in order to be detected by them, they had flown past the ship without stopping. Tilda, maybe whoever has destiny doesn't know about Spira. Or doesn't care. Tilda and they had done so before Colonel Vale and his team had arrived. Tilda, because otherwise our people would have noticed. Tilda, he wrote a note to have Vale and Co check the logs. Tilda, there might be something there. Tilda, of course, there was still one major question left on his list. Let's presume they get there. Who is going to win? And this was why this whole situation potentially was really bad news for them. Not only would Spira have to face whoever had done this, there was also the potential problematic outcome of the Nakai drones' war that would start as soon as the command ships reached the Nakai home galaxy. The Nakai have only fought them once, and they lost. Atlantis has gotten an exact count. There are 217 control ships. Based on the reports, the Nakai would be in the fight of their lives. But, based on the information the Nakai colonists gave on their home space, they will win. The problem is that they are in a cold war with an alien race called the Jinako. Mackenzie nodded. He remembered that from Vale's reports. And if they attack the Nakai as soon as the drone war is over? Well, based on the information we have, the Pentagon thinks that the Nakai would lose. In which case, if they also know about destiny or learn about it, we might end up trading one enemy for a worse one. Mackenzie sighed. This meant that there was not one war brewing in the Nakai home galaxy, but two, and they were still fighting a war with the Lucian Alliance here in the Milky Way galaxy. Not to mention the fact that there was a possible war waiting for Spira and her crew to get Destiny back. 6. What the Lucian Alliance has been up to. Outpost 7 Commander's Office, 24 September 2017/Day 30, 12:17. Yarnock Zinar was sitting in his office and sorting through a huge pile of paperwork and folders. Things were not going well for the Lucian Alliance. The war with the Tory was still going. Several years ago, they had attempted to destroy an Tory outpost called the Beta Site, only to find it had moved. They had attempted to find it again, but to no avail, and a recent attack on the Alpha Site had ended in defeat. Worse, he had just gotten a report from one of their spies. Before, the Tory had 2 ships in this galaxy, the George Hammond and the Odyssey. But in response to this failed attack, they had decided to salvage a 3rd ship called the Sun Tzu. Furthermore, they were also building a replacement for a ship called the Korolev, which had been destroyed by a race called Oriai. This will not make the bosses happy. Besides ship battles, there had also been dozens of ground battles between Alliance people and SG teams. The Alliance had wiped out several SG teams, but the Tory kept replacing them, and the Tory had burned several large Casa crops. Casa was an artificial and highly addictive kind of corn. So far, the war had been a heated stalemate, but with these 2 extra vessels, the balance might shift to the Tory. This will make the bosses really unhappy. As for Zinar, he was the commander of Outpost 7. Outpost 7 was where the Alliance was trying to dial with 9th Chevron. To do this, they had gathered a large number of reactors and several hyperdrive cores. The output was gathered in one place and then channeled through several buffers containing weapons-grade Nakwata, boosting it many times. The power source was far from safe. 7 years ago, it had been days from completion when they had run a test. It had resulted in an explosion that had destroyed the outpost and killed most of the people who were assigned to it. Zinar had been against the test. He and a small group of followers had left Outpost 7 several hours before. Still, they had barely survived the detonation. As a reward for saving some of the Outpost crew, he had been promoted to commander and was made leader of the rebuilding of the outpost. It had taken 3 years to remove the radiation enough to make it safe to begin construction. The original Outpost 7 had been built in a year. They cut too many corners the first time around. Not on my watch. This time around, it had taken 4 years. But now it was done. Here we go. He finished cleaning up the papers and walked out of his office. Outpost 7 Gate Room 24 September 2017/Day 30, 12:25. As he walked into the gate room, Zinar saw his forces getting ready. He had 120 men and women counting himself to secure Destiny with. Then, much to his dismay, he spotted the bosses. They called themselves the Council of Senior Commanders these days. Blasted fools. Back in 2009, the Alliance had sent an invasion force to Destiny. It had failed. And then, several months later, a faction within the Alliance had launched an attack against Earth. It had done some damage to key facilities, but not enough, so it had also been labeled a failure. After that, the Alliance civil war had begun. It had been a struggle between several factions for dominance within the Alliance. The war had lasted for 3.5 years, and at least in Zinar's opinion, was the reason that the Alliance had not launched an all-out attack against Earth. In the end, several senior commanders had been ended up running the Alliance. The next 3 years had been spent repairing the damage done by the war. And 6 months ago, work had begun for the war against the Tory to enter its next phase. First, they would take Destiny, and then they would launch an all-out attack against Earth. He reached his troops, and his second-in-command handed him his gear and weapon. Most of the senior commanders were chauvinistic men, so it was hard for women to make their way up the ranks these days. So when he had needed a second-in-command, he had ignored them and given the job to a woman, regardless of what they thought. She had simply been the best candidate. Her name was Valerie Watson, and she was a captain in the Alliance. Ready to go, Commander. Very well. He turned to a technician who was sitting at costume build terminal that controlled the Stargate. Dial Destiny. Yes, Commander. The Stargate began dialing, while Zinar heard the sound of the power source slowly ramping up to full power. It was the sound of crackling electricity. He looked around the gate room. Tilda good, loyal soldiers. Tilda his eyes went to the council. The gate room had a lower level with a single entrance where the force and the gate were, and a U-shaped upper-level/balcony. The council was looking at them from the upper level. Tilda typical. They are away from the danger, while we get to walk into the fire. Tilda he looked at the Stargate, which was locking the 7th chevron now. Tilda almost there. Tilda he checked his weapon to pass the time, but as he expected, it was in perfect working order. Then the 9th chevron locked in place and the wormhole opened, but power source did not sound healthy. Okay, peoples, he began. Here we go. He approached the event Horizon/Puddle. Tilda, one of the perks off being the boss is that you get to go first. Tilda taking a deep breath, he stepped through the Stargate. Outpost 7 Gate Room 24 September 2017/Day 30, 12:32. The last soldier walked through the puddle, and the wormhole disengaged. Senior Commander Gerhard Zinar had done his best to hide his worry, but he didn't like this whole mission one bit. The Alliance's last attempt had ended in disaster. And the current one was being led by his younger brother Yarnock. Tilda he is not a fan of us either. Not that I can blame him. Tilda most of the senior commanders were pigs. As for Gerhard, he had become a senior commander by being ruthless. And he knew it. But he also knew that he had to be ruthless, because otherwise the other senior commanders would eliminate him in a heartbeat. Furthermore, he knew that some of the commanders and captains were more cutthroat than the people in charge now. And it was his job to keep them in line. Tilda, if we don't attack Earth, we'll have another civil war on our hands. Tilda he was about to leave when he heard the technician behind the dialing computer curse. He made his way down to the lower level of the gate room. What is wrong? The computer was acting strangely, Commander, the technician said. It froze for a moment, then there was an odd screen and then he shrugged. It just went back to normal, sir. What do the logs say? One moment, sir. The technician hit several keys and the logs appeared on the screen. Oh, this is bad. He hit more keys. Somebody downloaded an unknown program into the network, and it came. He pointed at the Stargate. Through the wormhole, Commander. That's impossible. Radio signals cannot cross a 9-chevron wormhole, he began. And according to our intelligence, Colonel Young and his crew were in stasis. Even if they were not, the Tory do not have the technology necessary. Tilda, like I said, it's impossible. Tilda. I don't know what to say, Commander. The man entered more commands. The gate room is shielded, sir. No signals in or out. The only possible passage is the wormhole, and the logs check out, Commander. I don't. The computer suddenly went dark. It stayed so for several seconds, but then came back to life. There was computer code running across the screen. Crap, it's a virus. Gerhard grabbed the cable that connected the dialing computer to the rest of the base and pulled it out. But it was already too late. He knew this from a sharp shift in the sound made by the power source. Before he could do anything else, the blast door above the only entrance came down. Tilda, it's in the system. Tilda, he heard a loud click, which indicated that the door had been locked. The power source began making a really unhealthy noise. Tilda time to go. Tilda he pulled the cable that connected the dialing computer to the Stargate. Then he made his way to the left side of the room and pulled a large lever. It triggered a safety mechanism that manually dialed the gate to the nearest planet. As soon as the wormhole opened, Gerhardt and the technician ran through the puddle. 2 minutes later, Outpost 7 exploded for a second time. 7 entering Destiny 1. Spira Bridge Day 37, 1603. Spira had entered Galaxy Destiny 1 early in the morning. Vale and Teldy had commanded the first 2 shifts. 3 minutes ago, Jennifer Haley had relieved Teldy. She was sitting in the command chair, watching the telemetry from the sensors. Tilda only 1 gate in range, but it's better than nothing. Tilda, when they had begun the crossing, Spira had been fully stocked. And even now, they had several weeks' worth of supplies left. But it couldn't hurt to get a lay of the land. If they were in an area where resources were scarce, they would have to come up with plans to deal with it. "Alex, drop us out of FTL." "Yes, ma'am," Patterson said. "Dropping us out now." The ship dropped out of FTL, and the countdown clock popped into existence on several screens. Tilda 5 hours, "We'll have to be quick." Tilda Haley activated her radio and contacted Carlson. NR2 was on duty for this shift. And because Haley was running back-end from the bridge, Allison Porter would go with them instead. Carlson said that he would gather the team in the gate room, after which he cut the channel. Trying to distract herself, Haley got up, made her way to the forward section of the bridge. They had reconfigured the bridge during the crossing. The consoles were designed so that they could swap functions without needing any physical modifications. The 2 L-shaped consoles at the front of the bridge were Science 1 and 2 now. As for the 3 consoles directly in front of the command chair, those were the 2 flight control stations and tactical/communications. Tactical was in the middle, with the flight controls flanking it on both sides. Haley sat down behind Science 2 and waited for the Milky telemetry to appear. It hadn't been easy, but they had managed to tap their probes into the consoles. Originally, they had only had 1 Milky, but in the weeks since, they had managed to put together 2 more. She leaned back and hoped that things were going well in the gate room. Spira Gate Room Day 37, 1610. Alec Carlson made sure that he had all his gear. When the roster of NR2 had been drawn up, there had been an issue. Jennifer Haley was a major in the U.S. Air Force, but the rest of the team was civilian, so setting up a chain of command was a problem. But NR2 needed a second in command in case Haley wasn't available. After some discussion, Alec had gotten the job, which meant that now he was in charge of the team. "Nervous?" Porter asked. "Yes," Carlson began. "It's odd. I used to run a multi-million-dollar company and I never fretted, but leading a team of 4 people and I'm scared to death." Did leading that company include traveling through a wormhole and visiting a planet billions of light-years away from home? "Good point," Carlson said with a smile. Xander Henderson gestured to Carlson. While Carlson and Porter had been talking, Henderson had dialed the gate and sent Milky 1 through the wormhole. Now the probe's feed was coming back to Spira. Carlson looked at the screen. The planet was a desert. Tilda, just like the first planet Destiny's crew visited. Tilda, but that planet had white sands, while this planet appeared to have red sand. There were also small patches of grass scattered across the image. From what they could see, the planet orbited a single star. "Looks like the sun is setting," Porter said. "Okay, here we go," Carlson began as he walked towards the gate. "Weapons at the ready." "Tilda, I can't believe I just said that." Tilda, he drew his sidearm and stepped through the gate. F1Z008, Desert Day 37, 1611. Porter had been right. The sun was indeed setting. Despite this, it was still 40 degrees centigrade. "Tilda, we have to be out of here before the sun rises again, or we'll be cooked alive." Tilda, the planet was called F1Z008 by the computer. All the planets in the previous galaxy had started with a E, and the computer had apparently decided to start the names in this galaxy with a F. He scanned the area around the gate, but there was nothing there. As he did so, the rest of the team came through the gate and down the ramp. "Is it me, or is it really hot here?" Aronov said. "Nope," Bennett began. "It's really hot here, and it's night now, so daytime would be really bad news from a biological point of view." "Yeah," Coulson said. "We need to get moving." But which way? He decided to keep it simple and pointed straight ahead. "For now, let's head straight. We'll take it one hill at a time." "Sounds like a plan," Aronov said. The team walked away from the gate. Alec thought that despite the heat was actually a nice world. The desert continued as far as the eye could see, but something about it seemed off. What am I missing? He reached the top of the next hill and whistled. Standing in the middle of the sands were the remains of a small town. The hill he was standing on now was part of a ridge, which had hidden the ruins from the Malpese camera. The rest of the team joined Coulson on the hill. "Whoa," Aronov began. "Where did that come from?" "Well, you're the archaeologist," Coulson said. "Good point," Aronov said. "Let's go take a closer look." The team began heading towards the ruins. F1Z008 Desert. Town Ruins Day 37, 1735. The town did not have much technology. There was no electricity, no computers, and no indoor plumbing, but they had found several printed books. They were not in the best condition, but they were still readable. The real problem, however, would be translating them. The books were not in any known alien language. And I doubt that these people will have heard of English or Russian, Aronov thought. He was standing in the remains of a house. The place had simple, wooden furniture, which, he wrote in his notebook, meant that the planet either had forests somewhere, or the locals knew how to use the gate and imported wood from off-world. Another thing the furniture made clear was that the locals were humanoid. The shapes of the items didn't make sense for non-humanoid people. Besides the books, he had also taken several candles and some of the tableware. The latter was made from metal and was dusty and rusty. He made his way out of the house and looked around the town. There were several houses, a saloon, and a stable. In the middle of the town was a large well. The stable had the remains of some kind of beast of burden. 2 of them had been fitted with a saddle. Nikita took out his camera and walked into the saloon. He had already taken plenty of photos, but he wanted another look at the place. I wonder if there are more towns. He made his way to the bar and began looking for any clues. "So, how do you like the place?" Porter said as she walked it. "Well, we have a humanoid race. And from the looks of the place, they were at about the same level of technology as the Wild West." He paused as he spotted a piece of paper in one of the cabinets and grabbed it. "And from the looks of it," he studied the piece of paper, "this is not the only town they have." He handed the piece of paper to Porter. It was a map of the region. The Stargate was marked on it, as was the town they were in now, but the map showed 2 more towns. There was, however, a problem. The 2 towns were many clicks away, and it would take 2 hours to get there on foot. Aronov activated his radio. Aronov to Coulson. =// Coulson here. What's up? Nikita =// I've found a map with 2 more towns on it, but they are too far to hoof it there. We'll need one of the jumpers if you want to get a closer look at them. And he figured it couldn't hurt to see what the jumper's sensors made out of this place. =// sounds good to me. =// Coulson said. =// I'll make the call. =// The radio went silent. Nikita looked around the saloon. There was an upper floor with several rooms, which he presumed had been available for rent. While Coulson made the call, he decided to take a closer look upstairs. Spira Gate Room Day 37, 1740. Vale watched as Jumper 1 made its way through the Stargate. The wormhole closed 2 seconds later. He had overheard the conversation between Coulson and Haley, but had not spoken up. Haley was running this shift, so he wanted her to make the call, and she had decided to send the jumper. Tilda knowing more about the locals can't hurt. Tilda and they still had no idea who had built the Berserker drones and the command ships. Tilda maybe the locals have more information on them. Tilda he left the gate room and headed for his quarters. "You have really settled in," a female voice said. He turned to see Octavia the Elder well, the image of Octavia the Elder smiling at him. The artificial intelligence that ran Spira had not shown itself since they had arrived. But now, it was projecting an image of his mother and walking next to him. Tilda, this is no coincidence. We enter a new galaxy and she shows up. No, there is something going on, Tilda. Indeed we have, he began. It's a bit cramped, but it's home. Yeah, the ancients based me on the seed ships that travel ahead of destiny. And as Alex suspects, they kind of build me on the cheap, she paused. Well, except the relay factor on the lower decks. In their arrogance, they did indeed presume that they would never need me as an alpha site. Vale nodded. Spira had just confirmed their theories about herself. Tilda, some people would label me crazy for talking about a ship this way. Tilda, not that he cared. Maybe it made him a hopeless romantic, but he preferred to think of Spira as a lady. And a living, breathing thing with a personality of her own. Of course, the AI made it easier to do so. Not that I mind a good chit-chat every now and then, but... Why am I here? Octavia Spira smiled. I can see why General O'Neill put you in charge. You care about your people and you don't do nonsense. And you are right, I am not here to chit-chat. She paused. We have just entered a new galaxy. It took Destiny just a tick over a year to cross this galaxy. But more importantly, I wanted to tell you that this galaxy is not uninhabited. I can't tell you how long it will take you to get there, but there is an area ahead which is densely populated. The problem is that I can't tell by which species. Because Colonel Young and his crew boarded after the ship passed through the area, there is no detailed information on it, just long-range scans. So, besides several possible wars, Jackson and Miller had sent their findings to Spira by means of the DSI network, which meant the report was also in the computer's memory. We now have a major mystery to deal with it. And there is also the issue of who or whom built the control ships and the Berserker drones. Because my instinct tells me that if we don't figure out who made those drones, it will come back to bite us in the rear. Sounds like a totally accurate sum of the situation to me, Octavia Spira said. Good luck. And with that, she faded away. Tilda, she'll be back. Tilda Vale entered his quarters. The walls had been upgraded with sheets of wood which had been painted white. It didn't make the room any bigger, but it felt larger. He sat down on his bed and reached underneath it. First, he pulled out a wooden folding table. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough to hold the second item he pulled out. Said object was a laptop that Vale used to write his reports. He put the laptop on the table and got to work. Spira Bridge Day 37-2104. The clock hit 0, and Spira jumped back into FTL. While their first stop in this galaxy had not yielded any resources, NR2 had brought back plenty of items from the planet and a load of questions. Aronov was hard at work, turning the space between the bridge and the airlock into a large science lab, where they would try to find some answers. And it was not the only room being set up at the moment. The rest of the rooms in the Wraith expansion had finished growing and were now being decorated for their functions. Tilda, like the rest of this ship, they won't be luxurious, but they will work. Tilda, as she sat in the command chair, Haley got the feeling that Spira was more ready for whatever lay ahead than her crew. So she leaned back and waited for Spira to tell her what that was. 8 weeks later. Spira Science Lab Day 55, 12/17. Nikita Aronov was sitting in the lab, taking notes. He was surrounded by items that Spira's crew had collected from several worlds. All of them belonged to the same race as the locals from F1Z008. While the items had told him some things, He really needed to translate their language. And that was not really happening, and he couldn't ask the rest of his team for help. The rest of NR2, along with NR1 and NR5, were off-world. They were gathering ice to melt down for water. It was the fourth mission in a larger effort to resupply the ship. Despite the fact that the hydroponics bay was now in business and hard at work growing fruits and vegetables, Spira could still not feed her own crew. Tilda, and if we get more crew, it'll be even more strained. Tilda, and that was considering that the new Asurans didn't need to eat. The problem was that every inch of the ship was already in use. Tilda, the Ancients really didn't design this ship for long-term habitation, unless we missed something on the two lower decks. Tilda. Which was possible. They had only given the place a quick look after coming aboard. Tilda, well, this is not going anywhere anyway. Tilda, he put down his pen and notebook before walking onto the bridge. Major Ann Teldy was sitting behind Flight Control 1. Aronov gave her a nod as he approached. "How are the translations going, Doc?" "They're not," Aronov began, "but there is something else I want to discuss with you." "Let me guess, you want to talk about the food situation?" "Yes, I want to take a closer look at the two lowest decks. We only gave them a quick visit after getting here," Aronov said. "There might be a room we could turn into second hydroponics bay down there. We should check." "Okay, but take a team and be careful." "Yes, ma'am." Aronov walked out and set to collecting his team. Spira Deck 5, Corridor Day 55, 1225. Carl Grogan led the way onto Deck 5. He climbed down the ladder that connected it to Deck 4. Tilda, so far, so good. Tilda, the corridor was on the starboard side of the deck. It ran all the way from the bow to the stern. The right bulkhead had windows that showed space, while the left had a single set of doors. The doors were flanked by two windows, through which Grogan could see a large piece of machinery. This was as far as the crew had gone while scouting the ship. "All clear." Tzalo, Nikita Aronov, and Xander Henderson came down the ladder. Henderson was carrying a Geiger counter. He checked it and nodded at Grogan. "Okay, here we go." Grogan had brought a P90, which he now readied. "Tzalo, ready your MP5, just in case." "Yes, sir." Tzalo readied his weapon, while Grogan hit the button to open the door. As soon as the doors were open, he led the way into the room. They found themselves on a catwalk. He looked down and saw that there was indeed another deck underneath. As for the machinery, he realized that it was actually a launch tube. Tilda, this must be where the relays exit the ship. Tilda. The catwalk continued to another set of doors. It was part of a bulkhead, which had a hole in it. Said hole lined up exactly with the launch tube. Grogan pointed his P90 in that direction and spotted a rail with claw attached to it. Tilda, and that's how they load it. Tilda, the claw, would grab a relay and drop it into the launcher. Tilda, so maybe. Tilda, he opened the door and stepped through. This put him in a cargo bay full of communications relays. The devices appeared like metal cubes and were stacked all the way to the ceiling. "Well, that explains why Spira hasn't made any stops to gather resources to make relays," Aronov said. "We have enough stockpiled for the next 2, maybe 3 crossings." "Alas, that also means that we can't use this room for hydroponics," Henderson said. "Let's keep going." They made their way past the stack of relays. This revealed another door, which Grogan figured was to the last room on this deck. He opened the door and they entered the room. It had the ladder to Deck 6, but that was not the most interesting thing about the space. The door they had entered through was flanked by 2 stasis pods, and the other walls each had 4 pods. This made for 14 pods in total. "Whoa, this is interesting," Grogan said. "This is the same model as the ones on Destiny," Aronov said. "Not exactly," Tzalo said. "If I'm reading this right, these units are Mark 17s. According to what I've read, Destiny has Mark 11s. "Let's put a pin in that," Grogan said. "Tilda, it might come in handy for Lieutenant Johansson. Tilda, but for now, we need to move on to Deck 6. He climbed down the ladder to deck 6. The room at the bottom on the ladder was the same as the one above, which meant that they now had 28 pods. Clear. The others climbed down, and he opened the next door. Passing through the door put them in a room full of robotic arms with tools attached. This was clearly where the relays were made. They crossed the room to find a large teleporter was poised over a conveyor belt. The teleporter was how Spira collected the resources needed for the relays. Tilde great, but it means that his room is also a bust. Tilde, which meant that there was only one place left. Tilde under the launcher or nothing. Tilde beyond the teleporter was the set of doors to the last room. Here we go, Grogan said, before pushing the button. The doors opened to reveal a hydroponics bay. There were no plants or soil in the room, but plenty of planters. And the room ran the full length of the launcher, which made it 6 times the size of the current hydroponics bay. Whoa, Grogan said. Double whoa, Tizalo added. Am I the only one who thinks that this a really weird place for a hydroponics bay? Henderson said. Yeah, there's probably a story behind that, Aronov said. I'll do some digging. The team gave the room one last look, then headed out. Spira Science Lab Day 60, 1342. Nikita had used the ancient communication stones to arrange for some digging in the ancient database over at Atlantis. Dr. Radek Zelenka had provided them with a file about an ancient scientist called Ajax. When Atlantis had been in service, it had been home to a rebel scientist called Janus. Janus had run all sorts of experiments that the ancient political leadership had not been very happy with. He had not been alive when Destiny had been built, but Ajax had been. And Ajax had very much been the Janus of his generation. He had conducted experiments that had made him unpopular with the higher-ups. But despite this, Ajax had still managed to gather enough support to convince the leaders to build Spira. And he had pulled some strings to make sure that he was in charge of the ship's actual construction. And being the rebel he was, he had not built the ship according to the official blueprint. Knowing that the politicians would not inspect the whole ship in detail, he had hidden the stasis tubes and the hydroponics bay on the lower decks. He had also redesigned the bridge, which in the original design had been a closet with just a console to fly the ship, and added an airlock to deck. The bridge was on. I like this guy, Vale said as he browsed the file on Ajax. I thought you would, Aronov said. The folks on Atlantis have assigned a team to see if he made off the book's modifications to Destiny as well. Let's hope so, Vale said. Because according to the eggheads back on Earth, the Berserker drones will arrive in the Nakai home galaxy, and that will not be good news. Right, so any good news we can get is welcome, Aronov said. Duh, Vale said with a smile. And we really need a better name than Nakai home galaxy. In fact, we need better names for all these galaxies. It was at this point that Ann Teldy walked out of the bridge. Yes, Major, is something up? There's something you should see, Colonel, she paused. You too, Doc. Vale and Aronov followed Teldy onto the bridge. She led the way to one of the science consoles and hit several buttons. The main display changed to show a map. At the top of the map were several white dots, representing stargates. There was also a line of blue dots, which were the communications relays. But what was interesting was a cluster of red dots that appeared to be holding position just outside the galaxy. Are those red dots the command ships? Aronov said. They are, and we have no idea why they are holding position, Teldy said. Well, I'm not complaining, Vale began. Keep an eye on them. Yes, sir, Teldy said. Vale walked out of the bridge. Tilda were missing something. Tilda, but worrying about it wouldn't help. So they would simply continue working on the puzzle of finding out who or whom was behind this.